All right. Hi, hello, and welcome to Untangling APIs, addressing sprawl and securing your digital ecosystem. Now, today's exciting webinar is sponsored by F5 and Google Cloud and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I am so happy to be your moderator for this conversation today because we have a whole collection of awesome experts here with us who want to engage in an interactive conversation with all of you. So today, we're putting the slides down, we're setting aside the presentation decks, and we're just talking. We're going to cover what API sprawl is. We'll talk about what you need to know, how it can impact you, and how to mitigate those risks. We're going to kind of free flow and discuss, take some questions. So basically, it's going to be a great day. Now, I'm going to get our expert speakers out here with me in just a moment, but I want to go through a few housekeeping things to kind of get some things together for you so you can get the most out of our day here, and then we'll get this show on the road. So very first thing I want to draw your attention to is that question section of your webinar console. Now, this is the best place to get involved, to get interactive, and post all of those insightful questions, comments, feedback, all the ideas that you have as we go through. Now, as I mentioned, we want this day to be really engaging, fun, interactive, so be sure you found that question tab right now. In fact, let's get it a little bit of a test run right now. So we'll start out by saying hi or hello, give a wave to the community that's out there with us today. Tell us how your day is going or where you're chiming in from, whatever you want to post in there. But let's test run that questions window to start. Now, a quick side note, that questions window is also the best place to reach out. Let us know if you do have any technical issues today. I do want to remind you all that a browser refresh is going to get rid of any of the usual tech gremlins, but if they're being particularly clingy today, no problem. Just shoot us a message in that questions tab and the actual tech crew will be there to help you out. The last thing I want to point out on your audience console is the handouts tab. Be sure to head on over to that handouts tab. There are some really exciting resources and takeaways for you today. Make sure you've got those downloaded, open those tabs, save those for later because you're going to want to read those after we wrap. Now, it's not just awesome content that we're giving away today. We also have a $250 Amazon gift card as a prize drawing that we will give away at the end of our webinar. Now, you do need to be here live in attendance in order to qualify for the win, and all winners must meet Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you're wondering what those are, you can find the full T's and C's linked in your handouts tab. So head on back to that handouts tab, click in, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll find them there. Speaking of prizes, now not only does asking a question today help our expert speakers guide their conversation, bring up the energy, bring the conversation to what you're looking to hear about today, it's also a great chance to win a prize. We are offering a $50 Amazon gift card to the best question asked, and we review all the questions asked after we wrap. So even if your question does not get asked live, there is still a chance to win. So keep those questions coming in as we go through our day today. All right, well, that was it for housekeeping. I'm zipping through things quickly because I really want to bring our experts on out here with me. So I'm going to introduce them all and we'll get this conversation rolling. Today, we are chatting with an absolute superstar lineup of expert presenters. Ian Dinno, Senior Manager, Product Marketing at F5, David Remington, Director of Product Management at F5, and a familiar face here on the webinar. I'm so happy to welcome back Joshua Hazlitt, Strategic Technology Partner Manager at Google Cloud. All right, let's get our experts out here on camera with me and get this conversation rolling. All right, well, guys, thank you so much for joining me here today. I cannot wait to jump into this conversation. I am so excited to hear from all of you. And I want to start with a little bit of an introduction. I'm wondering if I can ask you all to just tell me a little bit about yourselves, your role, and what you're kind of excited to jump into today. And Josh, I'm going to start with you because I would actually really like to hear a little bit more about how F5 and Google Cloud are working together.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. It's good to be here. And I'm excited to be here today with Dave and Ian from F5 to share with our audience how we partner to help our customers secure and scale their API applications as they embark on their digital transformation journey and start to embrace public cloud. So certainly excited to be here with the team today.
Awesome. All right, Dave, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and tell me what you're looking forward to today.
Hi, I'm Dave Remington. I lead product management at F5 for API security. And I just want to say I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to partner with Google Cloud. to highlight how we can provide a really nice joint solution. But I'm also excited to be working in API security because it's pretty cool. Lots of new stuff going on. So looking forward to the webinar. Thanks.
Oh, that's great. It's a great start when the speakers are as pumped up as the audience is. That's what you want. Ian, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for product marketing of our distributed cloud app and API security solutions at F5. I'm interested in or excited about giving folks who join some insights and some food for thought as it relates to API management and API security. It's such a kind of burgeoning area of app development and of IT and security, roles and responsibilities that folks are needing some guidance. So excited to just share our thoughts and what we can do as Google Cloud and F5 to help customers in this area.
Okay, that is a perfect segue, Ian, because I think it's a good idea to start with a little bit of, sometimes, we use these words a lot and we don't always necessarily understand them or the nuance of them. So I want to take a look at API sprawl.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if you could let us know what that is, and then what are the key drivers?
Yeah, put simply, I think, API sprawl is many APIs of different types and different functions, spread over many locations, often managed by different teams. There's a handful of key drivers, and some of these drivers look different depending on the organization. First and foremost, the evolution of application architectures. So the adoption of modern microservices architectures, which can result in applications being composed of many dozen API endpoints, both for north and south communications with interfaces and east and west connectivity between different services. Another potential driver is siloed business units. You have different product and dev teams, not only siloed, based on their structure or product focused, but on approach and practices they adopt. So, you can have, within well-established business units, you can have multiple product teams developing separate services and products for a variety of different projects that aren't all, aligned. There's mergers and acquisitions that introduce silos and can, add new silos, new teams, new architectures, and legacy APIs that they bring over into, the acquiring company's IT environment. And then, this really can create a ton of different work streams, pumping out services and APIs without, a centralized oversight and controls in place, which can leave organizations exposed. Another driver is hybrid infrastructure. This is, can be an outcome of siloed business units as well as modern app development. And also just the pressures to scale and keep up with, performance demands. You often have these different siloed teams adopting infrastructure, an infrastructure strategy that's specific to them, and their familiarity and the skill set that they have. In one of our surveys, our State of Application Strategy report from 2023, only 15% of respondents have applications deployed in a single infrastructure. So that adds to the sprawl. So about 85% are operating across two or more architectures. So yeah, those are really the some of the key drivers that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, those are really big drivers. So you have all these complicated things that are kind of getting stuck on, and then you can't get clear insight because you've got these silo walls in between. So
Exactly.
that, obviously I can see why this would cause some problems. And Dave, I'm wondering if you could help me explore that a little bit further, because obviously there's a lot of reasons that API sprawl happens. And we just got some great, key drivers from Ian here. And I'm sure that this is a really layered conversation. So I'm wondering if you could give us a couple more layers, if there's any other important drivers that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, sure. So as we have moved into a modern app architecture with continuous development, we've accelerated the velocity at which we can deploy APIs. So we're getting more APIs out faster. And also the microservices approach to applications means that it is efficient to build small single function APIs for leveraging together in a whole product offering. So that's really driving the sprawl. And another real challenge is that many organizations are in the middle of their API journey, but just beginning their governance journey with regards to APIs. So they may have different teams that are setting their own standards, whether that's application programming frameworks and tooling, or whether that's security, or whether that's application delivery decisions, and all of these things are create sort of a wild west atmosphere environment in a lot of organizations.
I think Ian and Dave, you both have raised some really incredibly important points for the audience today. It's interesting, from a Google Cloud perspective, when we take a look at the API sprawl just overall and what the landscape looks like. There's some key drivers here that are really causing this massive shift in both adoption and the expansion or proliferation of APIs. The first is really application programming interfaces are how valuable software and data in one system talk to other systems. They're the building blocks for our digital economy. And I think the increasing usage of cloud computing, to your point, Dave, rise of microservices architectures and the need for businesses to be more agile and responsive to customer needs are really fueling a lot of this massive growth. And just to put things in context, 90% of developers use APIs. This includes both internal and external, right? So we talked about, Ian, you addressed north and south and east and west, and can account for up to 30% of the time that they spend in their dev cycles. And then, in addition, then SALT Security states that 91% of organizations had an incident related to API security this last year. So keeping an eye on security is paramount to how we're both adopting and securing the APIs that we use.
I'm so glad you said the word security, because that was the first thing that popped into my head when Dave was talking about the Wild West. Was, I think, depending on which version of the Wild West from cinema you're picturing, it could be a really fun and exciting place, but that also comes with a lot of that lawlessness and wildness that is maybe a little bit scary to people that are responsible for security. So I want to talk about security. Ian, I'm wondering if maybe you could give me a little bit of insight into what are the security challenges that API sprawl is going to introduce within some of the organizations for the folks in our audience here today?
Yeah, I think, the key underlying problem of API sprawl, it's definitely governance, but, the starting point or the challenge that all of those drivers cause is a lack of visibility. When developers and IT teams are working within a constrained environment, say an application cluster, that's easier to monitor, connect, secure, establish trust through centralized management and control. And sprawl just makes that exponentially harder. So the key security challenge there is visibility or lack of visibility. Organizations need to know what exists before you can, monitor it, put any controls in place. And that's where, shadow APIs come into play. And then, identifying abuse, understanding, and again, that's related to visibility, understanding normal and expected behavior versus abnormal, and looking for, abusive behavior within these API endpoints. And then also, it goes without saying, the increase in the threat surface. So how many more, points of potential vulnerability are being introduced, rapidly, as David alluded to, in terms of, the rapid, deployment of new endpoints or updated endpoints. And then Josh talked about some of those stats about the growth in APIs. So just the sheer size of that new threat surface and those potential points of vulnerability are some major challenges related to API sprawl.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. More to protect, more to think about. And Dave, I'm going to throw it back to you a little bit too, because you introduced this topic to us. So we're out in the Wild West. What else should we be thinking about for security challenges?
Yeah, so one of the things that is going to be a problem for a lot of organizations, especially maybe in regulated industries, finance, and so on, is that auditing and compliance is really impacted by that lack of visibility. So it's not just a problem for the security practitioners; it's also a problem for risk teams and compliance teams, because really those regimes are going to require documentation and examination of the APIs, and especially as we dramatically increase the value of the transactions that are being used, they're using APIs. What we're going to find is that we really have a lot of catch up to do, because once the organizations find all these APIs with our nifty discovery, they have to figure out how they're going to wrap their arms around it. And that kind of goes to another challenge. There are many legacy tools and especially processes in a lot of security organizations that were designed for monolithic applications, that a new version comes out once a year, or maybe there's 4 releases on a quarterly basis, and that's just not the reality we live in. So not only are we having a wideness problem in just the sheer number of APIs, but we also have a velocity problem in terms of the rate at which they're developed. And in particular, application teams and business teams can become very frustrated if they constantly have to slow down for security. So often they get permission to go fast anyway, because there's an imperative from the business. And so this really means that security organizations need to look at their practices and their procedures, identify the way they're using their tools so that they can better address what's coming in this new API landscape. And frankly, just in terms of scale, we have a real problem that a lot of security is manual. A lot of security is an individual analyst identifying and examining telemetry or logs or whatever and saying, I think there's a problem, I'm going to take an action. And there's just not enough people. And even if there were, organizations probably wouldn't be able to afford to hire them all. So that's a real challenge as these things accelerate. It's placing an extreme burden on teams that are still doing security the way they did it 5, 6, 8 years ago.
Okay, so we're getting into this a little bit because I think some of the surface area and the velocity, I love that. I think that's a very accurate description of one of the major challenges that teams face, is that just, not just the amount, but the speed. So I do want to explore that a little bit when we're thinking about, and Ian, I'm going to ask you if you can help us kind of understand a little bit some of the obstacles that our folks out there in the audience today might be thinking, well, okay, great. Clearly it's important for us to get a handle on API sprawl. Yes, check. But then, actually getting started on that process could feel a little bit daunting. So what are some of the obstacles that our audience should have in mind when they're thinking about getting a little bit more of a tighter rein on some of this API sprawl on their team?
Yeah, I think we used the term already, Wild West, and we talked about those drivers, around silos between business units. We talked about hybrid architecture. And so, a lot of organizations lack a comprehensive plan, or they're just starting to really figure that out. And so that leaves a lot of individual teams out to, do their own thing. And as the broader organization tries to wrap their arms around APIs and governance and security and put that plan in place. And so a lot of current state, organizations are left with, a patchwork of technologies, across a wide variety of environments. So, multiple control planes, no centralized view of app and APIs, possibly multiple WAFs, multiple API gateways, and management systems, standalone API security and observability, API testing tools, so on and so forth. So you can see that this, patchwork of different technologies across different environments and different teams creates, major operational challenges with management, not to mention the, security risk that opens up and can slow down reaction times exponentially. One of the things we saw in our 2023 State of Application Strategy report was the top challenge was complexity of tools and APIs that results in the lack of standardization and interoperability of those tools used for different deployment models. The second to that is really builds on that is applying consistent security was the second challenge there. So that's really one of the major challenges with the approach that organizations are following today.
Ian, you make a great point. And I think, pulling together what you and Dave have both kind of addressed, I think, we see the same in the way that our customers try to approach these key steps. And I think the first, that you mentioned was visibility, right? And once you get that visibility, you have to really think about who manages the APIs in your environment. So, coming to your governance piece, right? But who's using them, and then what data is being accessed. I think then implementation of that formal governance process for your API management gets you to the point of how are APIs developed, and then who is using those, which shines a light on the potential security risks and also possibility for compliance violations that could exist in your business. So, high value areas for you to think about, and then, make sure that you implement security measures to protect those using things like secure authentication, authorization, encryption. So, all really good points both you and Dave are making.
Josh, you just identified one of the main risks that I think that, if folks aren't dealing with these possible problems would be compliance. And I'm curious what other risks you might be facing as an organization if you're not addressing these vulnerable and unknown or unprotected APIs, and what that could possibly introduce to a business. Dave, could you clarify that for us?
Yeah, thanks. So, when we talk about the risks and, the identifying the unknown and unprotected APIs, right? A lot of the security challenges kind of boil down to the nature of how APIs function. They need to be authorized on a transactional basis. So each individual transaction is its own atomic unit, if you will, that needs to be handled uniquely. And this is different from applications, which typically do authorization on a per session, right? So, and therefore you have session affinity between the various requests as part of that traditional application. So first of all, we've got a real challenge with ensuring that authentication and authorization is done properly. There's 3 or 4 specific categories of, very critical vulnerabilities, like broken object authentication, that really are driving a lot of the security problems, right? And another thing that we have to remember is that, behind the APIs is a purpose. There's a business logic, or there's a functional logic that defines how the end consumer of that API, along with other API endpoints, generates value or an experience. But because of this, this sessionless nature of APIs, if you will, combined with this logic that needs to be delivered, you have a lot of room for clever attackers to analyze and identify places in the interaction of the APIs where unintended things become possible. An authorization JOT token that is far too broad and allows access to a bunch of functions that were never intended. There's lots of reasons why analyzing the business logic helps an attacker understand where the holes are. And really that's very challenging to do for these disparate atomic requests. And there's an entire category of vulnerabilities. It's called the OWASP API Top 10 from the Open Web and Application Security Project, and those are evolving. We actually have a review. We have a blog that was authored by our Office of the CTO around the differences between the new API Top 10, which is impending. But really what we have are a set of vulnerabilities that are completely unique and different from the good old-fashioned web app vulnerabilities that we've been dealing with for so long. Many of those vulnerabilities are still applicable to the API world, but there's this new category of challenges that identify things that are unique to API behaviors that organizations need to educate themselves on and understand, and that really help us target our efforts. So one of the challenges, and with apologies to many, is that a lot of organizations are trying to solve their API security problem with basic WAF technology. So that WAF technology is going to sit there, it's going to look for SQL injection attacks and cross-site scripting, hopefully block it, provide good audit logs. And you still need that for APIs. You can still perform a SQL injection attack, if you will, using API requests. But what we need to understand is that we need additional capabilities and processes in our organization and different tools that allow us to address these business logic driven vulnerabilities, to allow us to understand derive the content behaviorally so that we can understand, is the application being used in the appropriate way, or is it being abused? So we have to have an increased sophistication of capabilities to really identify what the attackers are trying to do. So this really boils down to having something that can do profiling for you, that can apply some artificial intelligence, machine learning based techniques to identify those who are misbehaving, and log, rate limit, block those requests so that they can mitigate the harm. And the other thing that is really important is making sure that you're looking for things like, is the authentication still valid? Many applications will accept expired tokens, for example. They shouldn't, but they do. And so, tools that can help you understand where you're making basic misconfiguration mistakes, or where there's something that the developers could tighten up. You need to be able to identify these so that you can both block them and also drive that back into your development process for long-term remediation and education purposes. And, so really what we need is to up our game in terms of tooling and capabilities, but also take a look at, how we're using those tools and making sure that we're capturing all the right information and getting it to the right people so that we can solve these problems.
I like that, and I really enjoyed kind of going a little bit through the evolution, and that this is an ongoing and changing and evolving threat, and then also giving us a few ideas, and I am hoping we'll dig into this a little bit more as we move forward too, of ways you can avoid some of those threats. But before we get into sort of how we mitigate or avoid these risks, I have to know, Dave, why is this on the radar right now? Why are APIs becoming such a significant target for bad actors? Is this new? And if so, why?
Well, it is new. And really what has happened is over the last maybe 2 years, as short as 2 years, we've seen the threat surface flip from sort of an 80-20 type approach, traditional lab to APIs, to exactly the opposite. And most organizations are far more exposed on their APIs. And the reasons why this is happening are in part because, attackers recognize that the most important business functions are often driven by APIs. That's where the money's being transacted. That's where the sensitive information is being transmitted. And so that's what the attackers want. So in some of this, they're just following the money or following the criticality to where the APIs are providing the function for the organizations. Another reason why these are growing in prevalence is that, frankly, many organizations have less mature practices, less mature, expertise around the API specific threats and vulnerabilities. And in part, this is a bit the fault of the regulatory regimes as well, because they're also just catching up with the notion that API vulnerabilities need to be given proper attention and proper focus for the regulatory regimes. And another thing, and I've talked about it just a little bit earlier, but want to re-emphasize the fact that a lot of the communication in APIs are machine to machine. You don't have the ability to do any challenge or inspection of the client side to determine ongoing trust. The only information you have is an IP address, which might or might not be useful. So really, what you've got is a situation where it's very, very easy for an attacker to either to essentially mimic legitimate behavior, because they just have to send individual single requests to try and do things, and that change in behavior as we've driven to APIs is really giving the attackers a wide open palette and canvas to paint all kinds of mean things on, because they really can see everything and they can probe everything now. And then there's I think there's some additional education that we need to pay attention to in our organization and our security practitioners and our development teams, so that they're aware that there's these new types of threats. They're aware that there are things that they need to very much be thinking about when they examine logs or behavior, when they're setting up their tooling, and when the developers are building the application, that are incremental in addition to the things that they've been doing today. And that is really driving part of this targeting, is because it's a new environment, which means there's going to be completely new attacks that no one has ever contemplated. And so, because the bad guys are constantly probing, constantly looking, and so we're going to have a situation where the threat landscape, if you will, the types of different attacks are going too fast for our security teams to keep up in terms of their expertise.
Dave, you make some great points. And I think one of the most important is the bad actors go where the money's going. And I think as APIs are becoming more ubiquitous for accessing important systems and data, they result in becoming a soft target for bad actors. So, typically developers that are creating APIs, we find, are not usually security experts. So APIs often, to your point, aren't properly secured, right, which leaves them vulnerable. It's also kind of important to note just kind of the ubiquity, how broad they've become. A recent study reported that there were over 2.5 million API security incidents reported last year, which was a 300% increase over the prior. So, this is becoming a more important aspect of how businesses need to think about what data and information that's critical to the organization is possibly exposed. And then, most importantly, we've of course started to raise the alarm bells, but organizations shouldn't be dissuaded from leveraging APIs. They are an important business driver, but they do need to elevate the importance of proper management and security to make sure they can keep the bad actors at bay.
I love that. Thank you for pulling us around into a nice positive, all the scary stuff. But we still got to do it anyway. So with that in mind, how do we get started? If somebody out there is maybe feeling a little overwhelmed, maybe there were some risks and vulnerabilities that they hadn't been aware of, or maybe they were and they were trying to pretend that they weren't there. So, okay, we're no longer in the hear no evil, see no evil. We need to do something. Ian, what do we do? How can the audience out there start to identify maybe scope and scale of growth of APIs in their environment and actually start to get a handle on that API sprawl?
Yeah, I think Josh alluded to it, and so did Dave. But you can't protect, you can't monitor what you don't see or what you don't know exists, right? So it's essential to have the capability to do continuous discovery and inventory, and learning of an organization's app and API environment to uncover and learn and map those API paths and look, find the delta between known documented API schema and what's actually running in your environment. So, organizations should look to deploy API discovery tools, and this can be out of band or inline, to identify, categorize, and map, and validate their API endpoints and their environment. Understand things like the data they expose, the authentication status, what, if any, protections are in place. And this should be a constant function. As we alluded to earlier, APIs can be constantly rapidly changing. And so that constant learning helps an organization stay up to date and be able to verify and validate that APIs are working appropriately, and that they are able to monitor and understand what's out there to put those protections in place if anything's outdated, those shadow APIs, so on and so forth. So once that app ecosystem is mapped, the inventories are created and or validated, organizations can really start then to address any potential issues. Dave alluded to this. Those security teams can then work details and information back into developers to deprecate old, unnecessary, or unauthorized endpoints. Start to evaluate the security risks of legitimate ones and making sure that they're working how intended. And then this assessment, this mapping, can help them prioritize efforts to address the most significant security risks.
Okay, well, and I think that's a great place to kind of get into a little bit more of where we're going, because we've identified the importance of this, and we've identified how we get started, but I want to look a little bit ahead at that end game. So Dave, I'm going to ask you to help us understand what a robust API security strategy actually looks like when we get there. And along the way, when our audience is kind of making that plan, who are the major stakeholders that they should be bringing into that conversation?
Yeah, so the stakeholders are going to vary by organization, but there's going to be a developer engineering function. There's going to be a security operations function, a infrastructure operations function. There may be a risk and fraud team. There may be separate governance teams. And so really what is necessary is that all of these stakeholders get together and they first have to understand the problem. So step one in your strategy is figuring out what your problem actually is. And this is not an academic understanding. That has to be a specific understanding based on that organization's risk profile and that organization's capabilities and frankly what they're finding as the discovery starts highlighting perhaps problems with some of the APIs. So once they understand it, they need to build a roadmap. And there's going to be a practice of identification of some sort of problem, a mitigation or compensation for that problem, and a process to remove that problem from the way the application is built, whether that's changing the way an endpoint functions, changing the way authorization is configured, whatever, some remediation that is persistent and will stop the problem from happening in the future. And so, many of the tools that an organization has today may still be very important and may be just fine for addressing their security problems or challenges with APIs. So, they're going to need to evaluate, what do we have in terms of runtime protection? Is that runtime protection adequate so that I can block, known bad, and I can flag anomalous behavior and bad actors? I'm going to need probably some sort of ongoing strategy to continue to understand my API inventory, so discovery or other tools that help me understand that. I'm going to have to, do something to address how I manage access control. A lot of organizations have single sign-on sprawl, where they have numerous different ways that applications are authenticated, often defined by the individual business team. And so that causes a complication when it comes to access control in the organization. And of course, then they need to assess, can they test for API-specific vulnerabilities? Do they have posture management that helps them understand the status of their security posture for their APIs? And these types of tools are going to be, they're going to be very adequate in many cases. In some cases, they may find they need something else or to add something from a process or tooling perspective. Once they've got what they think is a reasonable technical strategy, they're going to then need to start building a way that they can monitor the effectiveness. So are critical security flaws being reduced in the application footprint? Are we identifying the vast majority of threats, and are we, to what degree are we mitigating them appropriately, right? Because that's going to feed back into that tool evaluation. And maybe that the tool is just fine, it just needs to be, configured in a different way, but that's going to be an ongoing process. And so the next step is really to, essentially rinse and repeat those last two steps and continually do evaluations and measurement so that you understand that you're, not just trying to catch up with your problem, moving yourself to a point where you can get ahead of your problem.
Yeah, that constant cycle of revision and evaluation and revision is so important, especially, in any sort of program development, but especially when threats are constantly evolving and infrastructure is constantly evolving. None of this is a set it and forget it. And I think that maybe one of the best ways that we can learn, Dave, you just walked us through a really wonderful sort of comprehensive, creating a strategy 101 roadmap. But I'm wondering, if we can learn a little bit from what we've seen in our community. So maybe looking at some examples and case studies. And I do want to flag that we're getting close, maybe like 10 minutes left in our time here, because I know we want to leave some time for audience question and answer. So we'll try to zip through this next little bit. But Ian, I'll ask you to start us out. I'm wondering if you could maybe give the audience a few examples of some of those incidents that you've seen where maybe that lack of visibility and control has left an organization exposed and compromised. And if you can kind of walk us through what happened and potentially what was done in follow-up.
Yeah. So one of the examples, and we've written a blog about this on f5.com, was the T-Mobile breach that was, publicly announced, where over 30 million customers' data was siphoned off. And this was via use or abuse of an API. And now this was over the span of, I believe, a month-ish, 28, I don't know, somewhere between, 20 and 30 days. And, there aren't a ton of the specifics that were ever, I just checked last week, and I didn't see any articles or details about, how it happened, but they did specify it was through an API. And just kind of looking at the numbers, the sheer numbers of, on average, about 900,000 customers' data a day was removed until the vulnerability and the breach was identified by T-Mobile. And that, all of that information was taken out, siphoned off, without triggering any rate limiting thresholds, time series behavioral anomalies that may have been in place, right? So or that the appropriate threat level wasn't hit within any of the systems that were monitored. So this is kind of like a low and slow attack, but you can see how much data was taken out just leveraging an API. And thinking about the context of this, being T-Mobile, a large global organization, very mature, large, I'm sure, again, I don't know the budget, but large, IT security budget, seemingly, a ton of, resources, they had, this happened to them, right? So, they have a history, protecting infrastructure and telecom assets. And like I said, all of these resources, but, they weren't able to identify it, for roughly a month, right? So, with all of these new endpoints and points of vulnerability via APIs, the scope and the scale of the problem is exponential, and seemingly only will continue to get more complex. So I think an example like this is a good kind of call to action for a lot of organizations to start to put that plan in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're thinking about some of those tools and ways that organizations might be addressing that, I know that no conversation these days is complete without us talking about AI and ML. So I want to dig into that a little bit. And Dave and Josh, I'm going to ask for both of you to chime in on this one. And I'm curious, and Dave, maybe starting with you, how are some of these advanced capabilities such as runtime protection and really in particular AI and ML, how is that helping organizations get ahead when we're thinking about these risks?
Yeah, so I'm going to keep it short and sweet, right? Because what AI is supposed to do for you is make your security quick and easy, right? So fundamentally, what we need to do is we need tools that are able to discover the API endpoints, discover their legitimate behavior, and analyze them. We need to be able to identify when there's a bad actor based on behavioral cues and analysis. And these types of things are going to drive ease of use, which is really what it boils down to. The biggest problem or the biggest challenge most organizations face is that they don't have enough security practitioners, and they have developers that are racing, they're racing to meet production deadlines, and I'm sure they all want to write secure code, but the reality is that some of it is not, right? So the other thing that AIML is going to give us is what I like to call that security velocity, right? Because not only do we need to get caught, try to catch up, we need to get ahead of this so that we're really good at it. Because what's coming is an AI arms race. The attackers are also using learning language models and other AI-driven tools to make themselves more efficient, to identify more unique flaws in APIs. And so, on the defense side, we need the best possible tools because the attackers surely are going to get them.
You're so right, Dave. So right. It's interesting, just to your point, all conversations nowadays, AI and ML are part of the conversation. I think it's actually easier to ask what doesn't use AI at Google versus, what does, because AI is pervasive across the organization. But we're seeing more and more of our customers use artificial intelligence and machine learning in the security platforms that they're deploying. And there's some key reasons for this. To Dave's point, AI is used to identify and classify API traffic patterns, and it looks for suspicious behavior and potential attacks. And then secondarily, I think, large numbers of repeated requests or requests from unusual locations could be abnormal. And so once those are detected, those alerts can actually be used to automatically block suspicious activity or escalate the findings so that we can get further analysis and action taken by the teams that are specialists in regards to securing the APIs.
So really increasing that speed of reaction time. Well, getting into those solutions a little bit more as well, I'm really interested in DevSecOps. I think that's a really cool evolution and strategic approach. And what I love about it is that integration and the early on integration of these teams that have had a tendency to be a little more siloed in the past. So Dave, I'm wondering if you can speak to a little bit about, for an organization out there, something that they might be able to apply in terms of getting their engineering, their IT operations, their security teams to all coming together in order to tackle this problem.
Sure. So it all starts with a clear alignment across leadership so that there's a mandate for all of the various individual functions. But once you've got that mandate, really what you're looking to understand is that these different teams have completely different needs. A development needs things fed into their tooling and their workflows. So, opening trouble tickets that they have to go manually check is not something they're going to be excited about. So we need to drive into the development environment, into that tooling and that pipeline, the bits of information the developers need to be able to remediate security flaws. And conversely, we need to be able to understand that security, in addition to requiring, tools that specifically block or validate specific types of traffic, they need data, and they need the ability to not just collect all the data about their APIs, but that enables them to understand it. What are the applications at highest risk, for example, because they're, again, very limited teams. They need to be focusing their effort where the biggest problems are. So once we have that dual approach and we understand that we need to speak to each function in the way they need to be spoken to, the organizational alignment becomes much simpler.
I think that's a really important aspect for anyone out there to consider that is really struggling with those silos, is that communication. And I really want to keep going with this, I have to say, because this is so fascinating. But I know that we want to stop and leave some time for audience questions. So we're going to wrap up this part of our conversation and we'll transition into some audience Q&A. And there's a lot of questions coming in, so I know you guys are all ready for this. But before we kind of step into chatting with our audience here, Josh and Ian, I'm wondering if I can ask you to kind of wrap us up and bring us on home with this fireside chat here. If there was one thing that you wanted everyone in the audience to really walk away thinking about, mulling over and taking away from this conversation, what is that one thing? And Josh, I'll ask you to go first, and then Ian, if you can wrap us up.
Well, thanks, Jess. I appreciate that. And thanks, Dave, and thanks, Ian, for being here to help our listeners understand more about how we approach this. I think the one thing that I'd want the audience to take away is APIs are the future of where business is going. So, it's important for you to understand how to embrace those, properly secure them. We see a high percentage of our customers leveraging APIs to enhance their applications, to improve their business services. And this ranges from e-commerce companies to financial services, healthcare, and others, right? This has really become the most common way that we can innovate and focus on user experience. And so, as we've covered today, our partnership with F5 helps our customers implement API management tooling and state-of-the-art security for their APIs. So please, check out more information. Certainly glad to have you here today and spending time with us.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And I'll kind of build on that. I think, with our partnership, Google Cloud and F5, we can provide you and your organizations the tools to limit the complexity in API management and security deployments that maybe exist today, and bring those modern app and API security strategies to life, which again may be just getting put together, but we can help you bring them to life with a streamlined set of solutions that helps simplify implementation and operation of API management and security capabilities across app and API infrastructure, within Google Cloud and really anywhere else it's needed.
Well, and I think a lot of folks out there are, through the course of this conversation and certainly your wrap-up point there, really excited to give this a shot or at least to get this conversation kind of rolling and dig in a bit more. So for anyone out there that is really wanting to get started with Google Cloud and F5, what do you recommend as step one? What's their way to dive in?
Yeah, we'll get that link up in a slide. You can visit f5.com/GCP to learn more.
Perfect. Nice and easy. Okay. Well, as we just said, we're going to throw up some links for you all so you can get some additional resources and get started with F5. I'll put that up in just a moment here. And then we're going to transition into some audience questions. Are you guys ready for some Q&A time?
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we've got that link slide up for all of you there. So take a moment now and be sure that you are clicking on those links, open those tabs, save for later. Ian, Dave, Josh, I'm going to start you out with this question here. What are some common indicators that an organization might be experiencing challenges related to API sprawl and inadequate governance?
Hey, so this is Ian. Everyone, thanks for joining. I think one that I'm going to highlight is around decreases in reliability, issues with misconfiguration, resulting in outages or degraded performance of a website or applications that's leveraging APIs. So I think if there's concerns that this is becoming a consistent issue, that could be one indicator that I'll highlight.
Awesome. Josh or Dave, anything you want to add to that?
I think, Ian, great point. One other area I think could be is like uncontrolled growth of your APIs, right? If you're starting to see, spikes, that could be an indication that not only do you not have control of the management of the APIs, but you could be experiencing, some threat vectors that are causing high usage and definitely need to then, get your arms around it.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna jump to this one here because I think it's always nice to get real with it and kind of real world examples. So, question here: are there specific authentication? Boy, end of the day. Are there any specific authentication and authorization challenges that organizations should be aware of when they're dealing with a large number of APIs? So, what are those kind of key indicators? Anything in specific that you guys would want the audience to know? You're all so polite. Ian, do you have anything you want to throw out there for that one?
Yeah, I think
oh,
yeah,
sorry.
I think one of the things we're seeing here is with gateway sprawl as well, right? So
right.
If organizations have lots of lots of different teams managing and running their own applications and APIs, often authentication is handled by those gateways. So I think and this goes back to the security posture and patchwork of different solutions and for WAF and API security, etc. So if organizations can standardize on a gateway platform and a app development architecture and operations approach with governance, that's going to be critical to getting a hand on the authentication and authorization challenges related to API sprawl and just managing APIs in general. So I think it's critical to think about the tooling and having a framework in place that includes a consolidated set of common tools as much as the process and the people associated with app development and APIs.
Perfect. And Dave, I think your mic wasn't working earlier. Are you reconnected now? Can we hear you? If not, Dave wrote into that. It looks like we lost him when we transitioned off camera. So he's with us on chat. And so Dave said broken authorization is huge, and also added that there's a big hole in broken object level authorization and similar. This is typically enforced in the gateway or in code itself, and the security teams often lack visibility. Any clarity you'd want to add around that, Josh or Ian, or Dave summed it up nicely?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what I was saying about the gateway having a common set of tools and tooling, but also he brings up a good point about making sure that as part of these plans that there's cross-team collaboration and they're working together from a process governance and tooling perspective, so that the right teams have the right tools and the right visibility, and that can be controlled. That everybody has access centrally, and that can be controlled and managed by the appropriate teams via common set of control planes.
Perfect. Okay, we are right at time here, and I'm going to break my moderator rule of always trying to end on time and ask you guys one last question, and we'll keep it as short as we can. So since F5 solutions protect APIs across the entire enterprise portfolio with effective and consistent security for all clouds, architectures, and development frameworks, how do you improve risk management while supporting digital innovation?
Yeah, not to be sound like a broken record, but I think from a risk management perspective, it goes back to that visibility, I think, right? And so and then having that common set of tools that the right teams, especially the security, the risk management teams, have access to. So across all of those different architectures and those different teams, if you can deploy a consistent set of tools with a consistent set of capabilities, again, you may not always want the same policy in every place, but at least you have a centralized way to view and manage. And then, when it comes to risk management, you have that centralized view across all of those environments, those apps and APIs, regardless of where they live, to actually take action with and then log and audit capabilities as well are streamlined with those common sets of capabilities.
Awesome. All right. Well, I really do wish we could keep going because we've got lots more questions in the inbox here, but I'm going to make sure that all these questions get to the F5 and Google Cloud team. So you will have a chance to follow up with all the awesome folks out there. I also want to let you guys know, Dave, Ian, and Josh, that we got a lot of high fives from the audience and some big thank yous coming in for answering some of the questions as well. So I really do appreciate you guys sticking around. We are at time, so I will wrap it up there. But again, to our wonderful speakers, thanks so much for joining us here.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, and to all of you who asked some great questions, thank you. I know we are at time, so I'm just going to leave that link slide up a little bit longer while I give away our prize, and then we will wrap up and let you get on about your days. And I want to thank you for sticking around because, boy, was that a lot of really interesting information. I was loath to wrap up that conversation. I'm not going to lie. All right. So we do have a $250 Amazon gift card that we will be giving away to a lucky winner here with us today. I'm loving all the positive, good vibes coming in. I'm trying to give you guys responses as I also speak. So I'm multitasking, but I see all of your high fives coming in and I'm loving that. Okay. So our prize winner, $250 Amazon gift card, is going to Robert Stalneck from Texas. Robert Stalneck from Texas, congratulations to you. We will follow up after we wrap. Now, to those of you who asked a question, you are automatically entered to win our $50 Amazon gift card for best question asked, and we will be following up with you on that as well. We'll review all the questions. We will also make sure that we get you answers back to any questions that we didn't get to in our live discussion here. All right, folks. Well, with that, we're going to have to wrap it up because, boy, I wish we could keep going with this conversation, but at some point we have to go back to our days, right? So I want to, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, say a big thank you to F5 and to Google Cloud teams, and especially to our speakers, Ian, Dave, and Josh. You've given us so much to think about today, and I really enjoyed this interactive conversation, which brings me around to all of you out there in the audience. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for making that interaction possible, for getting engaged and asking those questions. I love these types of webinars when we just, again, as we said, put the slides down, put the presentations aside and talk, dig in and discuss and really get into the root of some of these issues and what we can do about them. So I know I've learned a ton from this session today. I hope you all have as well. I cannot wait to see you all at a webinar again soon. And until then, I hope you all have an absolutely beautiful rest of your days.